Welcome to the Fuzzy Mike, the interview series, the podcast, whatever Kevin wants to call it. It's Fuzzy Mike.
Hello, and thank you for joining me on the Fuzzy Mike, your outlet for interesting and informative conversation on mental health and self-improvement. I'm your host, Kevin Klein. I want to briefly take you behind the curtain for a moment so that you get a real feel of my enthusiasm for today's guest. You see, I reach out to hundreds of people each month and invite them to be a guest on the show. Now, I can usually tell just by the person's credentials if A, I'll even hear back from them, and B, the chances that they'll actually accept the invitation. The reality is, I get just slightly over a 5% response rate. And of that 5%, I might book 2 guests. So when I saw the credentials has appeared on Keeping Up with the Kardashians, ABC, NBC, CBS News, and the Huffington Post, I gave it a very low possibility that I'd even get a reply from Evan Jarschauer, the internationally recognized expert in professional mental health intervention services. And not only did Evan reply, he agreed to join us. So we caught up with him while he was in his car in Miami.
These are the walls of Wynwood.
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, so it's a regentrified part of Miami that has just taken off because they've painted the walls with all kinds of amazing murals, and as you can see right here.
Yeah, that's gorgeous.
Yeah, so all the walls are done like that. So I just happened to be in Miami on an assignment, and this is where I am. So this is why I am where I am.
Very cool. I appreciate you joining me. I want to start off by giving you a very sincere compliment, if you don't mind, sir.
Sure.
Okay. I have watched and interviewed numerous therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists. I've gone to several, and I think you are one of, if not the most sincere therapists that I've come across.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
I've had 2 psychiatrists that were just in it for a paycheck. I see one now who reminds me a lot of you, and you remind me a lot of him. And I that leads me to my first question is, where does this compassion in you come from?
So first, let me just say what I do, what I am, and then I'll get into that if I may.
Please.
So, yeah. So I am a professional behavioral health interventionist, and I help families that have loved ones, and I'm also a licensed psychotherapist. And I help families that have loved ones battling mental health issues, and oftentimes in conjunction with some type of substance abuse disorder, who are resisting care, and in many cases that they're so psychiatrically or psychologically compromised that they're, by the nature of their illness, they're not able to recognize they have a problem in the first place. So I work with their families, and then ultimately work with them to help get those people into a program for care. And then I also then work with the families to help support them in the process of their loved one's recovery. So that's what I do. As far as, where that comes from, I think that everyone is impacted by their childhood, where they come from. And for me, I had a very challenge, I don't know if that's the right word, but complicated childhood where my parents got divorced. I was really young. My father didn't want to my father felt that I should be with him. And this was back in like the mid 70s when, dads didn't necessarily get the custody or strong visitation rights. And my dad ended up taking me away and for quite some time. And I think that separation from my mom, that kind of living on like a refugee kind of a, undercover kind of thing, really wanting to be able to have that healthy family dynamic. So for me, there is kind of a mission in there where I see myself being able to help families that need to heal and need to come together. And I use a lot of my own pathology and my own experience to help do that. And that's pretty much the foundation of I guess the work that I do. And for me, there's no question. There's plenty of addiction stuff inside my brain and my body and my spirit. So for me, I guess there is a certain level of addiction to seeing to the work that I do. It can be very exciting, very emotionally, professionally rewarding, and I'm not too good with downtime. So you know, that's my deal. That's pretty much where I come from, basically, and kind of what made me want to or drove me into this direction of this work that I do.
How many people do you think, obviously it's going to be an estimate, but have had a childhood trauma in their life? Percentage?
It's going to be high.
Isn't it though? Yeah.
Yeah, it's high. And I think it's also relative to, how you define trauma, but, death, divorce, abuse on multiple levels,
Abduction
abduction.
in your case?
Yeah, I mean, most people don't get abducted. I would say most people don't. But I think that, at least in my world, it's definitely extremely high, a high percentage. And for sure, that then, kind of it impacts people at a young age, and it sometimes will set the course for who they end up evolve into emotionally as an adult. And so a lot of times I'm working with people that might have been good for a long, long time, and then some event occurs, and it then kind of like rehashes some childhood something, adolescent something, and then oftentimes, if not properly treated, people can spiral. And usually I'm coming in towards the middle, the end of a spiraling situation, and my job is to help people come out of free fall, get them stabilized, and then help set a course for recovery. That's my job.
So how can that trauma lay dormant for so many years and then something triggers it? Because if it's laying dormant, it's way in the back of your subconscious. And then something triggers it and it manifests itself and comes out. How does that happen?
Well, that's a great question. And I think I'll give you an example, and without even getting too political, but it's like, I think that just recently, even with like the COVID or the Corona thing, the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to undermine. I don't want to call it a thing. I don't want to undermine what it was and what it is. But I think there's no question that that event for sure was kind of like a earthquake in the middle of the ocean of the Pacific, where on the mainland you don't feel it, but it starts that wave, and that wave grows and it grows and it grows, and before you know it, it overtakes the town, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, for example, something where we believe that we're safe, we believe that, for the 9/11, we believe that we're the safest place in the whole wide world. We believe we're immune from global pandemics. And then something that happens, and it shatters, it rattles the core of society. And, if you had something inside you, for sure, that would be a major trigger that would kind of flip the switch back on to something that might have been previously embedded deep I don't want to get too deep here, but deeply embedded within your psyche, within your psychological makeup.
You're going through life like you think you're perfectly well adjusted, and then all of a sudden just shit happens and you just spiral out of control.
Correct. And I'm seeing that along with my team. By the way, my organization is called Behavioral Help Solutions, which is behavioralhelp.com. But we're seeing this all over the country. We work all over the country, from California. Where are you based, by the way?
I'm based in Missouri.
So from St. Louis?
I'm originally from St. Louis, but I'm living in rural Missouri in Springfield now.
From Springfield to St. Louis to Madison to Minneapolis, all over the country, we're seeing a unraveling of so many people that were good, fundamentally good, together. I'm using just simple terms, together for a long, long time, and may have had some underlying traumatic issue or something, and that was never fully processed, worked through. And for sure, it's coming back now. And like I said, we've seen our world explode exponentially. And not only that, but even people that didn't necessarily have that underlying traumatic event, this in and of itself, because you could argue the point that having various traumas earlier in life could almost serve as a vaccine against future traumas, because your body would have your mind would have potentially adjusted.
Yeah.
So people that may never have actually experienced any type of traumatic event coming into something like a global pandemic, for sure, shocked the system for a lot of people. So whether you had some type of underlying traumatic event prior, or that was the traumatic event, there's no question that it has impacted. I couldn't even countless multitudes of people all over the country and all over the world. So
I was really surprised when I read on Behavioral Health Solutions that you have said that COVID has grown your workload tremendously. I would have thought that would have come from your high-profile intervention with Kim Kardashian.
Did you see the amounts of boxes she had? That's just not a normal scenario.
Is that the guy?
At the door.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Evan.
How are you, Courtney?
Hey, Courtney. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming.
Absolutely.
But COVID really was the thing that elevated your workload.
Absolutely. I think that, with the Kardashians, that's something for sure that was an amazing opportunity. And, it definitely connected me with a lot of people that I can't talk about. The only reason I can talk about that is because it's in the public domain. Yeah. It was something that was televised. It was something that was broadcast, talked about. But through that, for sure, it helped me interconnect with a lot of people. And then from there, more people. But at the end of the day, I work in a very small pool of professionals that are licensed mental health counselors that actually do this work in the field. Because we don't have, this is where the office is a psychiatric, sometimes a psych hospital. Our office is sometimes on the streets of Dallas. It's in a casino floor in Vegas. It's in a beautiful chalet in Aspen. It's on the mean streets of you name the city, from Baltimore to Newark, and we're going into homes, we're going to closets, garages, and even up into trees when people are trying to kind of get away from situations that they believe are happening on the ground. So they'll actually go up into the tree, and we have to kind of help them get down sometimes.
So your answer right there is pretty much, I probably don't even need to ask this question, but I will because of COVID, but Can an intervention happen online?
Well, that's a really good question. And, part of the reason that I've been able to do this now, being in the field for over 2 decades, right, is I've learned that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. For every opinion, there's a counter opinion. And I've learned the more that I'm able to embrace other people's perspectives, the more I'm able to help people with my orientation. So as far as my orientation goes, my work is very hands-on. It's gritty. It's in the trenches. And like I said, there's something about that drives me. I'm driven to that particular type of work. Not everybody can stomach that, because you're literally, I'm always in very tense, complex, complicated, real life situations. So, I think that for me, I need the tactile experience. I'll talk about me. I need to be able to have that eye to eye contact. And this is no disrespect to people that believe that certain intervention work can be done, online. I don't think that my work can be done by artificial intelligence, although there's a lot of artificial intelligence out there and it's growing and it's exploding in nature. But I think with my work, it's about quick decisions in the field, putting out complicated interpersonal fires, and ultimately getting people the help that they need. So I don't see the online intervention from my perspective, but perhaps from others, depending upon the level of intensity of care, maybe it's different. That's my politically appropriate answer.
No, and it's perfectly valid, and you're right. Some people see tomato, some people say tomato. I get what we're saying here, but
yeah,
I would think mental health diagnosis and stuff like that, I think we could do that online. I don't think something as severe as an intervention could happen without the personal contact.
I believe that. I that's what I believe. I believe it's a critical element, but another person could argue the point that you can have that personal something, online, and there's more and more technology to do that. But there is no a substitute for that human interconnectedness.
Yeah.
When you're there, and I think also for the person that's going to get help that's resistant, in denial, unable to see for themselves and really feel the experience, having somebody there like myself, that third party professional, the empathetic third party professional, I'm very confident that makes a huge difference in the presentation and the understanding, because at the end of the day, if I wasn't there and the person battling severe postpartum depression or postpartum mania or schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, manic, depressed, or compulsive behavior, they could just walk over to the computer and just close it.
Turn it right off.
Or pull the plug out, and now what? Now what do you do? And so I can't be closed. My power cord can't be pulled out.
But that begs the question, because you are hands-on and because you need that tactile experience, how many dangerous situations have you put yourself in?
Well, that's another good question. So, and it's a complicated one too, because I am in so many situations that could very easily turn into a very bad situation. For me, every single one of my cases has that potential. And how I work to carefully mitigate the risk, the danger, is a critical element of the work that I do. So that's why, and I also work in a very litigious environment as well. I also work in an environment where me going out to help people, it's delicate because, you're also walking into people's personal lives and complicated stories and issues that potentially will put you in the line of fire. So what I've learned to be very careful, even with a question like that, so the simple answer to your question is that there isn't a case that I've had. I don't have any cases where there is no potential for things to get scary.
Okay. Legally, you have to say that. I get that. But if you talk to a police officer, they say that the worst thing to do is have to go to a domestic situation. You're going to a domestic situation every time.
Every single case is domestic.
Yeah.
Every single case is domestic. So it's very, very challenging. I will, here's some keywords. Weapons, physical violence, bodily fluids.
Wow.
Cutlery. There's a lot of things you got to be conscious of, even when you're working with somebody who has various black belts in different martial arts, and they are battling some type of mental issue. You know, also, I will help. One thing that I think is a critical part of the work that I do, now that we're just kind of getting into that a little bit, is you just have to turn on the TV almost every week, at least once a week. There's a case where a family, a mother, a father, even sometimes the person in crisis calls 911 because their loved one's having some type of episode. The law enforcement comes in, and we need our law enforcement, and I love our law enforcement. Law enforcement comes in, there's nobody there to kind of manage that individual. The law enforcement officer has as much mental health training as they can possibly have, but they also have a responsibility to protect themselves and others. And so you see those cases all the time where law enforcement is called, they come in, and just recently there was one where you hear the mom crying, "Please don't kill my son, please don't kill my son." And unfortunately, her son was killed by law enforcement. And I will say that in my cases, safety is always a critical element of the work that I do. And like I said, trying to mitigate the risk as much as possible. But in all my cases, there is quite a bit of risk when you're dealing with somebody who is having an episode out of control, requires help. Families oftentimes have tried to handle this themselves, and one of the fears they have is calling for help because they see things can go really, really haywire very easily. So the answer to your question is I'm always walking into situations where the risk is high, and the need to be able to carefully mitigate risk, danger is always, and maximize safety is always a critical element of the work that I do.
I'm talking with Evan Jarschauer. You can go to evan@behavioralhelp.com. A lot of questions that can be unraveled from that answer that you just gave. I'll start with the one that's first and foremost on my mind. Are police as equipped as they could be or should be to deal with mental health crises?
Yeah, it's another great question. And, it's so complicated because at the end of the day, law enforcement, I think their job is to enforce the law, right?
Uh-huh.
But there's no question that that more and more it's being intertwined with also understanding mental health law, and dealing with people that have mental health issues. I think that I can't speak on behalf of how law enforcement agencies are funded or should be funded, but there's no question that every single law enforcement agent that is in the field, if possible, should receive some level of training in dealing with working with people with mental health issues, especially people with mental health issues who are escalated. So I can only tell you that what I've learned through the years is that level of training is also in many cases limited to the resources available to provide that training. And so at the end of the day, it's just not a perfect system. I am seeing, though, on a positive note, I am seeing more and more law enforcement agencies requiring some level of mental health training for their personnel. I'm seeing that definitely on a rise, even where there are certain classifications of law enforcement agents that do have that specialized training. But I think without question, the more is needed.
My psychiatrist told me a long time ago, 20% of the population is on some sort of mental health medication, 80% needs to be.
That sounds like it could make sense.
Yeah. Well, you go to an intervention, you've been called to an intervention.
Yeah.
You sit down, you meet with the family. Is there ever a time where, because an intervention is because somebody loves and cares about the person who's destroying themselves, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You go there to talk to a person who's addicted, okay?
Yep.
Who has an addiction, and
Yep.
you in the course of talking with this person, you find out that the mom or the dad or the brother or sister is the one who's enabling this behavior. And so you literally have to turn your attention to this person who's giving them the go-ahead, the drugs, the money, whatever, and say, you know what, this is an intervention for two people, not just one.
Yeah, well, that's all the time. Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah, all the time, because at the end of the day, um, the how long somebody stays sick is also interconnected with how the people that surround that individual handle the situation. There's definitely a correlation between the two. And so in many cases, I'm working on a case where a family member would rather provide um, booze or dope to somebody instead of having them out on the street and buying it, and from somebody who could end up hurting them. I have that all the time. And so what I've learned over the years is this: that I've actually stayed away from the term enabling.
Okay.
And I'll tell you the reason why.
Please.
So I don't know if you have any kids or nephews or family. I'm assuming maybe you do.
Nieces and nephews, no kids of my own.
That's fine. Let's go with some of those nieces and nephews. And one of those was struggling. Your instinct kicks in to help. Now, what drives that instinct, that's the challenge. So at the end of the day, rather than enabling, it's more of instinct. My loved one is suffering, I'm going to help. And that's, for me, oftentimes a challenge, because that help sometimes means that they're giving them dope or giving them money and turning away, letting them stay in the home and using, because the argument is, I would rather them be in my home and use than be on the streets and end up dead. Mm-hmm. I'd rather be able to keep an eye on them. So I kind of stay away from the enabling thing and look at it more in terms of, I get it. You love your son, your daughter, your husband, your wife, your cousin, your niece, your nephew. And so therefore you're trying to keep them safe.
Yeah.
And you're trying to mitigate the dangers. The problem with that, unfortunately, is you're also perpetuating the underlying disease or issue or addiction, or by providing them the wherewithal and the resources to continue to use.
Yeah.
So there is that level of educating and really trying to. It's almost like the art of war, but in a very loving, supportive, therapeutic perspective. The best way to get rid of your enemy is to make him your friend.
Right.
Now, I don't know if he wrote that, but I'm sure in some of his writings, it's in there somewhere. And so what I've learned to do is, rather than say, what are you doing? Why are you, I never use the word why. Why are you giving him $50 a week? Why are you letting him stay in the house? I get it.
Mm-hmm.
I get you want him safe. You don't want to see him, the needles. You don't want to see him use dirty needles. You don't want him to have a debt on the street. You don't want to see them sell themselves so that they can get a fix. And for that reason, this is what you're doing. Let's find a way to work around that. And because unfortunately, you may end up finding them cold anyway. You may lose them anyway.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna go down, let's go down with a fight, and let's work together and find some solutions where we increase the probability that we'll get them the help that they need, we'll mitigate the resistance, and ultimately we'll help them get onto the road to recovery, because they depend on you to help guide them and support them to get better. They need you to kind of lead the way and lead the charge. So if they see that you're giving in to the sick part of their being, then unfortunately my hands are kind of tied.
That answer it sounds to me like an intervention is just not a one-time visit. There should be or could be multiple visits.
Yeah. Well, there's multiple contacts for sure.
Okay.
There may typically I have, there's the pre-intervention, which is the physical on the ground with the family and the loved ones, co-workers, and then the actual intervention with the individual, and then the loved ones and the people that are in support of the intervention. But at the end of the day, there are multiple Zoom calls, conference calls. We are in prior and after the intervention to deal with the issues, to help get people on. You're right. To help get people molded together to create a unified, loving team to support the objective of seeing their loved one not only go to get help, but really create a unified support system to help increase the probability that they will be compliant with care post-treatment. So yeah, I do that all the time.
What would you call the person that is the subject of the intervention?
We call them the identified person. I stay away from the term patient because I'm really not providing therapeutic services.
Okay.
I'm more of a consultant, as opposed to a therapist, because we really want that individual to receive the therapeutic services in the program or with the providers that are selected for their care. So we call them the identified person.
How many of the identified persons that you've worked with actually know or realize they have a problem?
I would say by the time that I'm called in, all of them.
Really?
Yeah, all of them. But to further your question, I think it's out of all the people that you go to help, how many are willing to admit that they have a problem?
There's the question. Yeah.
Yeah, and that changes the numbers considerably, because they all know there's a problem. They all know that there's a problem. And I think that's when the numbers go down significantly. We might be it's a very low number of the people that, very low number of people that I get in there and they go like this: wow, I'm so glad you came because I have a problem. I was kind of stuck, and I'm glad you're here to help my family get unstuck and help me and kind of guide this through. It's a very, very low number. Every so often I do, and it's wonderful when that happens, but most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time, a lot of times I hear the statement from the person I'm going to get help, don't you know that nobody's going to go get help until they're ready to go get help? And then I channel Tommy Lee Jones in The Fugitive. Now I got to be real careful with this, because I cannot say this in a disrespectful manner. This is going to be said in a very respectful manner. So when a family member or a friend or even an identified person says, you're just wasting my family's time, energy, money, and all that stuff. You got paid, right? Like that. I did. And we're going to get you help. So, for example, in the movie The Fugitive, did you see it? The one with Tom? Okay. So Tom Lee Jones is chasing Dr. Richard Kimball, and they're in this like aqueduct thing by a dam, right?
Yep.
And Tommy Lee Jones's weapon, he's a federal marshal, hardcore federal marshal. Don't mess with him. He's smart. And he's running after, and his sidearm falls out. And who picks it up but Dr. Richard Kimball? Dr. Richard Kimball is standing in front of the opening of the dam from the aqueduct, and he points the weapon, at the federal marshal played by Tom Lee Jones, and he says, remember what he said?
I didn't kill my wife!
And then with his hands up in the air, what did Tommy Lee Jones say to Dr. Richard Kimball?
I don't care!
He did not mean that in a disrespectful manner. He wasn't trying to be cocky or belligerent. His message to Dr. Richard Kimball was, listen, I'm here to see that justice is served. I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to be your judge, jury, whatever. I just want to make sure at the end of the day that I get my man safely back to the system, then they can go ahead and process and figure this out. I don't mean you any disrespect, Dr. Richard Kimball, but I am going to get you, and you're going to come with me. And if not, you're going to have to do what you got to do. It was a calculated risk that the federal marshal took, at which point Dr. Richard Kimball ends up dropping the weapon because he could shoot him. And what did he end up doing? Quote unquote, according to the federal marshal, he did a Peter Pan off of this aqueduct.
Yeah.
Anyway, so at the end of the day, I have many cases where the person will say they're not going to get help until the family, friends, or if the person says they're not going to get help until I'm ready. And in a very loving, supportive, understanding, strategically intuitive, oriented towards who I am as a person, rather than you have to spend another decade of establishing a more robust bottom, let's get you some help right now. I hear you. I'm not judging you. You at the end of the day, you are suffering. You know that. And as far as you believing that you need more time to suffer, I just can't let you do that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to help get you some help. So for that reason, I'm going to keep going until we get you some help. That's kind of the orientation that I have.
Okay. And of the identified persons that you work with, how many of them are surprised to see you and how many of them are not surprised to see you?
Well, it depends on the case. It really depends on it. I don't have a number for you on that, but I can definitely say that even when somebody appears surprised, are you that surprised that your mother or your father or your husband or your wife couldn't watch you hurt yourself any further? How many cries for help? I mean, at the end of the day, you were crying for help left and right.
Yeah.
I'm just I'm the manifestation of your cries. So maybe you're surprised to see my face. I know it's not that pretty, but but at the end of the day, I don't think you're so surprised that your family and the people that love you the most, they don't love me. Okay, the people that are around you, that they wanted to see that you got some help and they didn't want to wait another day, not another night, not another horrible phone call from some state trooper. They want to see that you get help today because they love you and they feel that you deserve it. And they deserve it too. They deserve the opportunity to have this amazing, healthy relationship with you so that your kids can have a parent, so that your brother can have his brother, your mother can have the mom can have a relationship with her children, her husband. So I'm here because this is, at the end of the day, what you've been crying out for. That's when the person goes, shut up. Or they go, okay, I get it. I very rarely have a case where someone is like, everything was just great. Everything was wonderful. And I have no conceptualization at all of your purpose for being here. I don't ever have those cases.
Wow.
There's always, even in the mental health cases, you still have, there's still an understanding that things aren't so good. And you're here because there's a problem. I don't have those cases where, you know what, this is, wow, I'm shocked. I don't have those.
Well, that's funny because I'm equating this particular part of the conversation to what John Mulaney said about his own intervention.
So you come to the intervention, you go through the whole thing.
You don't know it's an intervention when you come to it.
Right.
I thought it was dinner with two friends from college.
Right. It was not.
It was not.
And you were like 2 hours late for that dinner.
I was 2 hours late for that dinner, but...
An intervention for me, and I'm thinking, I don't need this.
At first, that's what his answer was. Sure, I get it. But upon further reflection, I'm confident he was like, okay.
Yeah.
I don't not have any cases where the person goes like, wow, this is perfect timing. Never. Doesn't happen. Does not happen.
How much does humor play? How much can humor play into our recovery, our development mentally? I mean, because Mulaney's just made a whole act out of it now, and that's the way I deal with my childhood trauma is through comedy. How much can humor play a role in our healing?
Another delicate question, because what you're seeing is like over 2 decades of my evolution as a practitioner, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of an interventionist. And so at the end of the day, being able to use my own warped sense of humor, I believe is an essential component of me being able to keep my sanity and keep it together under some of the most stressful, complex, complicated situations. But I've also learned that not everybody has a warped sense of humor, and not everybody appreciates my sense of humor. But I've learned how to kind of gauge it and to try to find the lighter moments that seem more universal in nature. And I think that if it was all just pressure, I think that would just eventually make everything just that much more tense and more tense, pressure filled. So I've learned to be able to use levity, not in a demeaning or demoralizing, manner, but more so the humanness of the experience and being able to take a very complicated, uncomfortable, tense situation and, be able to kind of shed some light on that moment. The person says, for example, before I need to think about this, I need to go grab something, to eat before so I can think about this. And I go, I'm starving too, man. Let's go grab a bite. And the family's like, what? That's just kind of a simple example, but being able to use that lighter side, join the person in their experience and be human.
Uh-huh.
I think that's a critical element of making this whole, at least my world, work. If not, it would all just be intensity, no release, and just a real combative, complex air. And I try to use my levity, my humor to kind of let a little bit of that tension out delicately and thoughtfully in the process.
Yeah, it's got to be a delicate situation because humor and entertainment is so subjective. It's probably the most subjective thing on the planet. And if you think something's funny, 9 out of 10 might not think it's funny. And so, it's a balance that you gotta to tightrope. Is there one addiction that's worse than another?
I think for me, there is not one that I find is easier. But I will say this: sometimes the addictions to substances that are legal or prescribed by a physician, those can be some of the more challenging because oftentimes the identified person would say it's legal or it's prescribed by my physician. So how is this bad? I'm using it as prescribed, but you're also, maybe drinking along with the medication, or you're using 2 different medications together that are counter affecting each other. So, but those are some of the most difficult ones. I'll give you an example. Nicotine. Super, I don't get called in for interventions for nicotine, but it's definitely a super hard addiction to break. Alcohol, it's everywhere. So for the person that's so you have somebody who has a cocaine addiction or a gambling addiction. No, they would have the hardest time staying away from alcohol. You can stay away from casinos, right?
Yeah.
You can stay away from coke dealers, but it's really, really hard to stay away from alcohol when it's in supermarkets.
Well, now
how
has the legalization of marijuana affected the caseload?
Right. So where my world really began to explode, it wasn't COVID. It was when weed began the decriminalization, the not being
Easy
a
for you to
stigma
say.
anymore. Yeah, right. Um, without question, weed is the number one drug, intersected, interconnected, intertwined in my work for sure. Um, and that is, you know, at the end of the day, there's no there's no argument. I don't think you can make an argument that weed doesn't have medicinal qualities.
Mhm.
There are medicinal qualities with weed, absolutely. And for some people, it is a wonder drug, wonder medication, wonder ointment. The problem is that for a lot of people that have other underlying mental health issues, weed can weed is like a switch and it turns on a dragon, like a fire breathing dragon that you had deeply embedded within your brain and it lets it loose. And that's if you're just taking whatever is prescribed to you, whatever edible, whatever you're smoking. At the end of the day, that's probably, like I said, the number one challenging substance use issue that's affecting people's mental health. And also, I'm seeing a lot of that where they're not abusing it. It's just the dose that you take. It may just be enough to significantly impact your thinking and impair your moods. And I'm seeing that left and right. The challenging thing with weed is that there's such a social component
Mhm.
with smoking weed or consuming edibles. It is kind of there's a societal shift. There's a societal shift where it's accepted, it's cool, it's in. And to not be able to smoke weed, it's kind of like back in the day when people would have business meetings and having a few drinks was part of the business meeting, right? Today, in I guess current social or corporate culture with regard to drinking, they've got policies on drinking and policies on drinking in a business meeting. But I think that weed has become such an accepted part of you know uh,
Culture.
society with culture, and so for that reason, if you're the one that can't smoke weed, it's almost like in many cases, at least as the feedback I'm getting as well, you can't fit in.
Yeah.
And that can be socially debilitating and make you awkward. It's kind of like it's almost like the analogy would be the kid with diabetes going to the birthday party and can't have the cake.
Right.
It's not that the cake is the cake could kill you.
Right.
But the weed may not kill you, but your behaviors associated with your consumption of that might put you and everyone around you in jeopardy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what's happening with the weed scene, at least from what I'm seeing.
Is there such a thing as a healthy addiction?
I think that anything, and this is so I'll make a simple statement first. I think anything to an excess is no good, is not good, not safe, not healthy. But I think that so many of the amazing things that all the technological accomplishments, all the amazing things that have been done by people in the arts and technology, by somebody that had a passion and maybe was addicted to whatever their passion was and they couldn't stop doing it and that drove them like that. So I think that I think if it's something that takes you away from being able to live a productive, happy, healthy life, then I think it would be a bad thing. But I think if you're addicted to, like I'm addicted to this work, I'll admit it. I love it. I love the feeling of getting that call, going out to help a family in crisis, being able to establish order, get people help, it really is a very cool feeling. On top of the fact it's what I do to provide for my family, so I'm a very lucky guy there.
Well, and
For them.
the other thing too that I heard you say before is that your line of work actually helps you with your own mental stability.
Oh yeah, absolutely, without question. Like I said before, I'm not so good with downtime. It's and so without question, it's not that I feel better when I see people not doing well. That's not the case at all. It's that for me, that sense of purpose really helps my mental health, helps me with with feelings of depression or anxiety. It really helps me stay level, that I know that I'm actually a productive, engaging participant in making a difference. So there's a huge sense of connectedness with that work that I do, and helping me maintain my emotional equilibrium. It's crazy in a way because I'm walking into situations that are like out of control sometimes, and people will look at me and say, "What's wrong with you?" Why is this guy? Well, he's that way because it's really not his family. That's not necessarily the case. It's just more so that I am in that moment really feeling how it's kind of like, in many ways. Do you ever see those? I'll use another movie reference. And this is not about me killing people, okay? So don't think that. Why would you even say that? But but no, but like in the Equalizer movies with Denzel, who I love, or even the Bourne Identity, like Jason Bourne,
right?
When he walks into a room, he's calculating. He's looking at the doors, looking at this, checking this out, the angles, because he has a plan. His plan is dangerous, and like they're gonna fight and stuff, jujitsu. But I, in many ways, as I'm in the situation, I'm also looking at the various. Sometimes I am looking at the exits, but I'm looking at the different scenarios and different people and how I can best move things around to achieve the ultimate goal of helping this person and doing it in the most loving, supportive, and comprehensive way. I don't know what your question was, but that felt good.
No, I was talking about how your own mental stability is helped by your
vocation.
Yeah. And
yeah, absolutely. And that helps me keep my head together.
Yeah, that's the same thing with me hosting this podcast that now has a significant concentration on mental health and personal development. I've been seeing psychiatrists since 1995, Evan, and so yeah, you would think that I would be an expert, but brother, I got to tell you, man, going back to the very first thing that we talked about in this conversation, you made a light go off for me, and you made a light go off for me. One of the cool things that I read about you. And we've been talking about interventions because that's what Evan Jarschauer does along with mental health therapy. But it doesn't need to be an addiction that can require an intervention. You can do it for mental illness. You can do it for chronic depression. You can actually do it to help offset school violence and mass shootings.
That's a great question. And I think that I've had a lot of cases where, had somebody stayed on the trajectory they were on, they might have been a good candidate for somebody that might have done something like that.
Wow.
So yeah, absolutely. I've never had an intervention per se where it was somebody who was, shooting up schools.
Yeah.
But for sure, I've had many cases where there were people that, had they continued on in the trajectory they were on with their compulsive behaviors, with their delusions, something bad could have happened like that. We'll never know. Hopefully we'll never know.
Yeah.
But for sure, like I said, I specialize in the dual diagnosis intervention, or even just a straight mental health intervention, but the dual diagnosis intervention where somebody is dealing with some underlying mental health issue, depression, anxiety, severe mood swings, PTSD, and they are oftentimes self-medicating with some type of mood-altering substance, whether it's alcohol, weed, pills, any you name it. And at the end of the day, I'm brought in to help manage, deal with, coordinate, facilitate the person from where they are, out of control in crisis, establish order, help them get help, and work with the family to support that process moving forward. That's my job.
How many of your prior cases actually keep in touch with you and tell you about their progress?
It varies. I couldn't give you a specific number on that, but a lot do.
Yeah,
a lot do, and it comes in different waves, in different stages. So, I might not hear from somebody for quite some time, and then I'll get a text message. For example, hey, Evan, just want to let you know, I just finished college. But wait, I still think you're a two-headed snake, but I want to thank you.
Oh my gosh, really?
Oh yeah. I get those every so often. Or the family will say, you know what, she's doing great. She's back with the kids, and I get those. So those are, but they get peppered in with sometimes in some of my most difficult, challenging days, I'll get a text message, and I'm like, okay, I can make it. It helps. Those really do help, by the way. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, they definitely help. Oh, for sure.
Yep.
That's got to be the most satisfying part of your work.
Super.
Yeah. Well, you know what, man? I have had a blast talking with you. I knew this was going to be an awesome conversation, and I can't thank you enough for getting back with me and saying that you'd be available, because I honestly didn't think you would be, given your credentials with, all the ABC, NBC, CBS News, Huffington Post, Kardashians, which we didn't even really talk about. Is shopping a real addiction?
Absolutely. When at that time, when you are, you are well exceeding your income. However, in that particular case, the end of the day, the income exploded.
Yeah.
So, but absolutely it is for families where, especially, well, I can go on and on, but there's the simple answer is yes, if it affects people's ability to provide for their families, if it becomes something that's consuming a bulk of their time, for sure, it can be a real deal addiction.
Hey, how can people get in touch with you? Evan at behavioralhelp.com.
Yeah, that's my email, Evan at behavioralhelp. It's help, not health. Evan at behavioralhelp.com. And then you can find me there. We've got a bunch of social media stuff, but that's probably the easiest way to find me.
Also, go to lifehack.com and you can read 13 articles that Evan has written, each one more fascinating and more helpful than the next.
Thank you. Absolutely.
You're welcome, brother. Hey,
thank you for having me.
If you're seeing a mental health provider and you go into the office and the visit goes something like this, your blood pressure looks good. You must be feeling better, right? Yeah, things are good right now. Good. See you in another 16 weeks. Then it's time to find someone like Evan. I mentioned earlier in the conversation that Evan reminded me of my psychiatrist now, Derek, and that there's actual sincerity and genuine concern from them. Even when I've been on a run of stability and lower depression, Derek still asks me questions about my life. He wants to know what's happening in the good times as well as in the bad times. In fact, I'm not going to lie, I see him taking more notes during the uneventful visits than he does when there are actually issues to discuss. That's the kind of person you're looking for when you're searching for a therapist. My thanks to Evan for joining us. Again, you can reach out to Evan at Evan, EVAN, at behavioralhelp.com. Behavioralhelp.com, HELP. My thanks again to you for listening. My weekly request is this, that you like, follow, subscribe, rate, and share the Fuzzy Mike to help grow the numbers of people that we can help. We're all in this fight together. Nobody fights alone. If laughter's your favorite kind of medicine, well, then check out the Tuttle and Klein podcast, where my longtime radio partner, Tim Tuttle, and I, we've teamed up to give you the style of show we did behind the scenes during our 25 years together on commercial radio. Parameters? None. Filters? None. Laughs? Well, plenty. New episodes post every Wednesday. The Fuzzy Mike is hosted and produced by Kevin Klein. Production elements by Zach Sheesh at the Radio Farm. Social media director is Trish Klein. I'd love to hear from you. Suggestions, comments, or even ideas for the show. Email thefuzzymike@gmail.com. See you next Tuesday. And thank you again for being here. I don't know why I look at the microphone. It's not like you're there. You're there. I'm an idiot.
That's it for the Fuzzy Mike. Thank you. The Fuzzy Mike with Kevin Klein.
Fuzzy Mike.